Every soul longs for a witness. Beneath the layers of persona, achievement, and practiced composure, there exists a quiet hunger, the hunger to be seen, not admired, not judged, not analyzed, but truly seen. The child looks into the eyes of a parent and learns either acceptance or rejection. The adult carries that imprint into every relationship thereafter. And the question echoes beneath the surface of all human striving. Will anyone see me as I am? This hunger is older than memory, deeper than conscious thought. It beats in the heart of the infant reaching for connection, the teenager hiding behind walls of rebellion, the elder reflecting on a lifetime of longing. We spend decades learning to articulate our needs, our dreams, our fears, but this need to be witnessed transcends words. It is the soul calling out for recognition, not of its accomplishments or its failures, but of its essential being. Carl Rogers understood this hunger intimately. In his work with thousands of clients, he witnessed the universal ache of invisibility. People would sit across from him, successful, articulate, seemingly put together, and slowly reveal the devastating truth. Despite being surrounded by others, they felt profoundly unseen. They had learned to perform love, success, happiness, but somewhere along the way, they had lost touch with their authentic self. To be unseen is to live as a shadow. To be seen is to become real. The mirror of presence. Carl Rogers taught that healing begins not with technique, but with presence. The mirror that matters most is not made of glass, but of empathy. When we feel another human being leaning in, not to correct us, not to mold us, but to receive us as we are, we begin to recognize our own shape. It is in that moment that we feel permitted to exist. Presence does not demand performance. It whispers, "You are enough here." But what does it mean to truly be present with another human being? Rogers discovered that most of what we call listening is actually waiting for our turn to speak. Most of what we call empathy is actually projection. We hear our own story reflected back rather than receiving the unique narrative before us. True presence requires what Rogers called unconditional positive regard. A quality of attention so pure it makes no demands, offers no corrections, imposes no agenda. Imagine being in a conversation where you don't have to monitor your words, edit your emotions, or perform acceptability. Where your anger is met with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Where your sadness is held with tenderness rather than rushed towards solution. Where your joy is received without diminishment or competition. This is the mirror of presence. It reflects back not what we think we should be, but what we actually are. Rogers observed that when people experience this quality of attention, something miraculous occurs. They begin to drop their guard. The masks slip away, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple recognition that it's safe to be real. In the presence of genuine acceptance, the true self emerges like a flower turning toward light. Masks we wear. We learn early that certain parts of us are welcome and others must be hidden. We smile when we are sad, nod when we disagree, offer stories that conceal more than they reveal. These masks are not lies, they are survival. Yet with each layer of concealment, we drift farther from our own aliveness. Rogers called this the split between the real self and the ideal self. The cost of belonging to systems that do not accept us is self-betrayal. To be seen without the mask is not weakness. It is the beginning of liberation. The first mask is often created in childhood, born from a moment when our authentic expression was met with disapproval, dismissal, or danger. Perhaps we learned that our tears were too much, our excitement too loud, our questions too many. In that moment of rejection, the child makes an unconscious decision. I must become someone else to be loved. And so begins the careful construction of the false self. We learn to read rooms like survival maps, adjusting our personality to match the emotional climate. We develop different versions of ourselves for different audiences: the dutiful child, the achiever, the caretaker, the rebel. Each mask serves a purpose, but none represents the whole truth of who we are. Rogers recognized that these adaptations, while necessary for survival, come at a profound cost. When we consistently deny our authentic experience to maintain relationships, we begin to lose touch with our own internal compass. We start to doubt our perceptions, dismiss our feelings, and ignore our needs. The question, "What do I actually want?" becomes increasingly difficult to answer because we've spent so long focused on what others want from us. The tragedy is not that we wear masks, it's that we forget we're wearing them. We become so identified with our roles and personas that we mistake them for our essential self. Recovery involves the courageous work of remembering what lies beneath the performance. The courage to be Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This paradox is the heart of authenticity. The courage to be begins with allowing what already is. Transformation is not imposed from outside, but unfolds from within, like a seed finding soil and light. Yet this process requires the mirror of another, someone who holds space without judgment, who welcomes the imperfect self. In that safe soil, the courage to be takes root, but accepting ourselves just as we are is perhaps the most radical act in a culture that profits from our dissatisfaction. We are surrounded by messages that we are insufficient as we are. Too much of this, not enough of that, perpetually in need of improvement, upgrade, transformation. Self-acceptance feels almost revolutionary in such a context. Rogers discovered that genuine change cannot be forced or manufactured. When we try to transform ourselves through willpower, criticism, or external pressure, we often end up reinforcing the very patterns we're trying to escape. The harsh inner critic that demands perfection is the same voice that created the masks in the first place. True transformation happens when we stop fighting ourselves and start accepting what is present. This acceptance doesn't mean resignation or passive approval of everything in our lives. Rather, it means approaching our current reality with curiosity and compassion instead of judgment and force. When we can look at our fears without trying to eliminate them, our anger without trying to suppress it, our sadness without trying to fix it, something shifts. The energy previously spent in internal warfare becomes available for genuine growth. The courage to be authentic is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. It requires the willingness to disappoint others rather than betray ourselves. It means choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, and integrity over approval. This is not selfishness. It is the foundation of genuine relationship, unconditional regard. To be seen is to be offered unconditional positive regard. This is not approval of every action, nor blindness to harm. It is the radical act of separating the person from the performance, the essence from the behavior. It is the gaze that says, "Even here, you matter." For many, such acceptance is unthinkable. They have only known love as conditional, tethered to achievement, obedience, or perfection. Rogers' insight was revolutionary. When love is unconditional, growth becomes inevitable. Unconditional positive regard is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in Rogers' work. It does not mean approving of all behaviors or enabling harmful patterns. It does not mean having no boundaries or standards. Rather, it means maintaining a fundamental respect for the person's inherent worth, regardless of their actions or choices. Think of how a mother might feel toward a child who is throwing a tantrum. She doesn't approve of the behavior. She may set firm limits or consequences. But her love for the child remains constant. She can see past the temporary state to the essential being underneath. She holds both the behavior that needs changing and the person who deserves love. This quality of regard is transformative because it creates safety for the real self to emerge. When we know we will not be abandoned or rejected for our authentic expression, we can risk honesty. When we trust that our worth is not contingent on our performance, we can stop performing and start being. Most of us have experienced conditional regard, disguised as love. We've heard messages like, "I love you when you're good," or "You make me so proud when you succeed," or "I can't stand it when you act this way." These statements, however well-intentioned, teach us that love is earned through behavior and can be withdrawn as punishment. Rogers' revolutionary insight was that unconditional regard is not only possible, but essential for psychological health. When people experience this quality of acceptance, often for the first time in their lives, they begin to internalize it. They learn to offer themselves the same unconditional regard, becoming their own source of acceptance rather than constantly seeking it from others. The wound of invisibility. What happens when no one sees us? When our voice echoes unheard, our essence unrecognized? The wound of invisibility shapes destinies. Some become overachievers, desperate to be noticed. Others retreat into silence, convinced their presence is a burden. Both carry the same scar, the ache of not being received. To be invisible is not merely to be overlooked. It is to be denied existence. Rogers' therapy was, at its core, an antidote to this wound, a space where invisibility dissolves into recognition. The wound of invisibility is perhaps the deepest cut the human soul can endure. It begins early, when a child's emotional reality is consistently dismissed or ignored. "You're not really sad," we might be told. "You're just tired. You don't really hate your sister. You're just jealous." These well-meaning attempts to manage our emotions teach us that our internal experience is untrustworthy, invalid, or inconvenient. As we grow, this wound manifests in countless ways. We might become hypervigilant about others' reactions, constantly scanning for signs of acceptance or rejection. We might develop an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for others' emotional states, believing that if we can just be perfect enough, helpful enough, agreeable enough, we will finally be seen and valued. Or we might go the opposite direction, building walls so thick that no one can get close enough to reject us. We might become cynical about human connection, convinced that no one really cares anyway. We might develop a tough exterior that says, "I don't need anyone," while inside, the original wound continues to throb with the pain of unmet longing. Both responses, the desperate seeking and the defensive withdrawal, are attempts to manage the terror of being fundamentally unseen. They are strategies developed by a younger self who concluded that their authentic being was somehow deficient or dangerous. Rogers understood that healing this wound requires more than insight or understanding. It requires a corrective emotional experience, actually feeling seen, heard, and valued for who we are, rather than what we do. This is why the therapeutic relationship itself became the primary tool of transformation in his approach. The meeting point. Every genuine encounter is a threshold. Rogers described therapy as a meeting of persons. No expert towering over a patient, but two humans facing one another in mutual regard. The power of such a meeting lies not in advice, but in authenticity. When two realities touch without masks, a third space is born, the space of transformation. In this sacred meeting point, the false dissolves, and the real self steps forward, trembling yet alive. Rogers revolutionized psychology by insisting that healing happens not through techniques or interpretations, but through relationship. He believed that every human being has an innate tendency toward growth and wholeness, what he called the actualizing tendency. This tendency is not something that needs to be created or installed. It simply needs the right conditions to flourish. Those conditions, Rogers discovered, are surprisingly simple: empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. When these qualities are present in a relationship, transformation becomes inevitable. Not because someone is being fixed or changed from the outside, but because the conditions are created for the person's own healing wisdom to emerge. The meeting point between two authentic selves is sacred ground. It is where masks drop away, where truth is spoken, where vulnerability becomes strength. In this space, there is no hierarchy. No one person holds all the wisdom or power. Instead, there is mutual recognition of shared humanity. Rogers often spoke of being fully present with another person. This means bringing our complete attention to the encounter, not planning our next response, not judging what we're hearing, not trying to fix or change anything. Simply being present with what is, as it is. When we experience this quality of presence, something in us recognizes it as what we've been seeking our entire lives. It's the feeling of being truly met, of having our inner reality acknowledged and honored. In that moment, we realize we are not alone with our experience. Someone else can see us and remain present with us without trying to change us or make us different. Shadows into light. To be seen is not always comfortable. It means our shadows are visible too. The anger we suppress, the grief we bury, the fear we deny. Rogers understood that growth requires integration, not avoidance. When another person sits with us in our darkness without recoiling, our shame begins to soften. The hidden becomes shareable, and in sharing, it transforms. The shadow ceases to be a prison and becomes instead a passage into wholeness. Carl Jung, Rogers' contemporary, spoke of the shadow as the parts of ourselves we've banished from consciousness, the aspects of our personality that don't fit our self-image or our ideals. While Jung approached the shadow through analysis and interpretation, Rogers understood that these hidden parts of ourselves could only be healed through acceptance. When we've spent years hiding our darker emotions, our anger, jealousy, sadness, or fear, the prospect of being seen in our fullness can be terrifying. What if someone sees how angry we really are? What if they discover how scared, how hurt, how confused we feel beneath our competent exterior? Rogers discovered that when these shadow aspects are met with the same unconditional regard as our more acceptable qualities, they begin to transform. Anger that has been suppressed might reveal itself as appropriate boundary setting. Sadness that has been denied might open the door to genuine grief and healing. Fear that has been minimized might contain important wisdom about real dangers or unmet needs. The magic happens when someone can witness all of us, light and shadow, without trying to eliminate the darkness or amplify the light. This complete acceptance allows us to begin integrating these disowned parts of ourselves, rather than continuing to exile them. We learn that we can be angry and still worthy of love. We can be scared and still capable of courage. We can be imperfect and still valuable. This integration is not about becoming someone different, but about becoming whole. It's about owning all the parts of our experience rather than trying to present only the acceptable ones. When we no longer have to hide aspects of ourselves, we can use all of our emotional and psychological resources rather than spending energy on concealment. The risk of authenticity. Why do we resist being seen? Because to reveal is to risk rejection. To show our raw self is to place our heart in another's hands. The terror of abandonment haunts us, yet every mask we wear costs us intimacy. Authenticity is a gamble. It risks loss, but it opens the only doorway to love. Rogers insisted that genuine relationship is built on transparency, congruence, and acceptance. Without them, we relate mask to mask, and no one is truly present. The fear of being truly known runs deeper than most of us realize. It's not just the fear that others will reject us if they see who we really are. It's the fear that their rejection will confirm our own worst suspicions about ourselves. If I show you my real self and you turn away, it validates my secret belief that I am fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or too much to handle. So we develop elaborate strategies to maintain connection while avoiding true vulnerability. We share just enough to seem open, but not so much that we risk real rejection. We present our struggles in ways that make us seem relatable, but not overwhelming. We offer our gifts in ways that serve others, but don't expose our deepest longings. These strategies work to a point. They help us maintain relationships and avoid abandonment, but they also create a profound isolation. When people love our masks, we know they don't really love us. When they praise our performances, we discount their appreciation because it's not based on truth. We end up surrounded by people yet feeling fundamentally alone. Rogers understood that this dilemma, the need for connection versus the fear of rejection, is at the heart of most psychological suffering. His solution was both simple and revolutionary. Create relationships where authenticity is not only safe, but welcomed. But authenticity requires courage because it cannot be guaranteed to succeed. When we risk showing our real selves, some people may indeed turn away. Some relationships may not survive our honesty. Some connections may prove too shallow to hold our depth. Yet Rogers believed, and his decades of experience confirmed, that authentic relationships, even when fewer in number, provide a quality of connection that no amount of surface-level interaction can match. When we are truly known and still loved, we experience something that heals us at the deepest level: the transforming gaze. There are moments when someone looks at us and we realize, they see me. Not the curated image, not the armored exterior, but the trembling soul beneath. Such moments alter destinies. A teacher who believes in us, a friend who listens without judgment, a partner who welcomes our wounds. Each gaze becomes a catalyst. Rogers observed that when people feel deeply received, they spontaneously move toward growth, like plants turning toward sunlight. To be seen is to be invited into becoming. These moments of being truly seen are rare and precious. They might last only seconds, but their impact can reverberate through an entire lifetime. Something shifts when we feel another person really seeing us, not what we're trying to project, not what they need us to be, but the essential truth of who we are in that moment. Rogers called this empathic understanding, the ability to perceive another person's inner world as if it were your own, while still maintaining awareness that it is their world, not yours. It's the difference between sympathy, feeling sorry for someone, and empathy, feeling with someone. It's the difference between understanding someone's story intellectually and actually touching the emotional reality they're living. When we feel empathically understood, several things happen simultaneously. First, we feel less alone with our experience. What felt like a private struggle becomes a shared reality. Second, we begin to trust our own perceptions more deeply. If someone else can see what we're experiencing, then it must be real and valid. Third, we feel permission to experience our feelings more fully rather than trying to manage or minimize them. Perhaps most importantly, we begin to internalize the quality of acceptance we're receiving. We learn to look at ourselves with the same compassionate gaze that's being offered to us. The critical inner voice that has dominated our self-talk begins to soften, replaced by something more gentle and understanding. Rogers noticed that when people feel deeply seen and accepted, they naturally begin to move in the direction of greater authenticity, creativity, and aliveness. Not because someone is pushing them to change, but because the conditions are finally right for their own growth to unfold, becoming real. To be seen is not the end, it is the beginning. Being witnessed allows us to witness ourselves. The internalized gaze of acceptance becomes an inner resource. No longer dependent on external validation, we begin to carry our own unconditional regard. The self that once fragmented now coheres. This is what it means to become real, not flawless, not fixed, but whole. To be real is to stand in the paradox of strength and vulnerability, light and shadow, self and other, fully alive. The process of becoming real is not about achieving some perfect state of authenticity. It's about developing the capacity to be present with ourselves as we are, moment by moment, without constantly trying to improve or fix what we find. It's about learning to extend to ourselves the same quality of acceptance we long to receive from others. When we become real, we stop living in reaction to our past wounds and start responding from our present wisdom. We no longer need to prove our worth through achievement or earn love through performance. We can make choices based on what feels true and alive rather than what we think will gain approval. This doesn't mean we become selfish or stop caring about others. In fact, the opposite is true. When we're no longer desperately seeking acceptance, we become capable of offering genuine care rather than the anxious helping that comes from our own neediness. When we're not constantly monitoring our image, we can actually pay attention to what others really need. Becoming real also means developing the capacity to hold paradox. We can be confident and uncertain, strong and vulnerable, joyful and sad. We don't have to resolve all our contradictions or present a consistent image. We can be human, complex, evolving, sometimes confused, always growing. Rogers believed that this journey toward authenticity is the fundamental direction of human growth. When the conditions are right, when we experience enough acceptance, understanding, and genuine care, we naturally move toward greater realness, creativity, and aliveness. The gift of seeing. The journey does not end with being seen. It culminates in seeing others. Having tasted the freedom of acceptance, we become capable of offering it. Rogers believed that every human being has the capacity to create healing relationships. The gift of seeing is the gift of presence, listening without agenda, beholding without judgment, affirming without conditions. In doing so, we participate in the sacred cycle. As we are seen, we become real, and as we see others, they too awaken into reality. This is not merely psychology, it is love made visible. Once we have experienced the transforming power of being truly seen, we naturally want to offer that same gift to others. Not as a technique or strategy, but as an overflow of our own healing. When we no longer need constant validation, we can give our full attention to understanding someone else's experience. This is perhaps Rogers' most profound insight, that every human being has the capacity to create healing relationships. We don't need advanced degrees or special training to offer the qualities that matter most: empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. We simply need the willingness to show up authentically and extend to others the acceptance we ourselves have received. When we learn to truly see others, we discover that giving and receiving become indistinguishable. In the act of offering someone our full presence, we ourselves become more present. In accepting another person's reality, we expand our own capacity for self-acceptance. In witnessing someone else's journey toward authenticity, we support our own continuing growth. This creates what Rogers called the good life, not a static state of happiness, but a dynamic process of fully participating in our own existence and supporting others in doing the same. It's a life characterized by openness to experience, trust in our own organism, and genuine care for others' well-being. The gift of seeing is ultimately the gift of love, not sentimental or possessive love, but the kind of love that creates space for another person to be fully themselves. It's the love that says, I see you, I accept you, and I trust your capacity to grow and heal. This is the love that makes real relationship possible. Closing reflection. To be seen is to become real. This is more than a title. It is an invitation to step beyond performance into presence, to risk authenticity in the hope of true encounter, to discover that beneath the masks, the fears, the striving, there is a self waiting to be witnessed into existence. And perhaps in seeing and being seen, we finally remember what it means to be human. The path from invisibility to reality is not traveled alone. It requires the mirrors that only other human beings can provide, the empathic gaze, the accepting heart, the witnessing presence. But once we have tasted this recognition, we carry it within us. We become our own witness, our own source of acceptance. And then, in turn, we become mirrors for others, offering the same quality of presence that once transformed us. This is how healing spreads, how authenticity becomes contagious, how love multiplies. One real encounter at a time, we participate in the great work of helping each other remember who we truly are. Roger's legacy is not just a theory of therapy or a set of techniques. It is a vision of human possibility, the possibility that we can create relationships and communities where people feel safe to be real, where authenticity is celebrated rather than punished, where growth happens naturally in the soil of acceptance. This vision begins with each of us, in each encounter, with each choice to see or be seen. In a world that often feels fragmented and false, we can create pockets of realness, moments of genuine meeting, relationships where truth is welcomed home. To be seen is to become real, and in our realness, we offer the world something it desperately needs, the reminder that beneath all our performances and pretenses, we are already enough, already worthy, already whole. Practical integration. Daily presence. Practice. Spend 10 minutes each day in silence, simply noticing your feelings without judgment. Offer yourself the unconditional regard you seek from others. Authentic dialogue. Choose one relationship where you will risk a deeper truth this week. Share something real, however small. Notice what happens when you drop the mask even slightly. Seeing others. In your next conversation, listen with the intent not to reply, but to truly understand. Offer the gift of presence. Watch how the quality of your attention affects the other person's willingness to be real. Shadow integration. Notice moments when you judge or dismiss parts of your own experience. Practice responding to these shadow aspects with curiosity rather than criticism. What might they be trying to tell you? In these small acts, the great work of becoming real begins. Each moment of authenticity, each gesture of acceptance, each choice to see or be seen contributes to a world where realness is possible, where human beings can encounter each other without masks, where love becomes visible in the simple act of witness.